If you're like me, you probably didn't notice this seemingly subtle yet critical distinction of Michelangelo's work, that he portrayed wingless angels. It's a detail discussed among his greatest admirers and scholars, and the question remains without sufficient reason. Why did Michelangelo go against Renaissance visual tradition and depict his angels without wings? Moshe Arkin, author and scholar, offers a surprising yet convincing explanation for this tantalizing question. And you may be surprised to find out that Michelangelo's wingless angels could have very well been the result of a psychological and religious conflict within his own mind. First, it's important to note that Arkin's explanation isn't based on any particular psychoanalytic theory used to explain Michelangelo's conscious or unconscious nature, but rather that the wingless angel came to symbolize something of great significance to the artist. When analyzing idiosyncrasies in any artist's body of work, it's imperative that we understand both the cultural and historical context of the time in which a piece of work was created. But Arkin's analysis of Michelangelo's wingless angels isn't the first attempt at interpreting a Renaissance body of work. There have been past pursuits, from Sigmund Freud's interpretation in his Leonardo da Vinci and A Memory of His Childhood, and Ernest Jones' The Influence of Andrea de Sarto's Wife on His Art, both of which were criticized for not analyzing a work of art on its own merit. While Arkin explains that finding Renaissance art worthy of an in-depth analysis is a daunting feat, he believes that Michelangelo's extensive body of work and lack of a compelling explanation for his wingless angels merits a deserving explanation based on sound methodological grounds. Renaissance art had its iconographical traditions, and winged angels was one of those traditions. But as Arkin explains, rendering wingless angels was rare, and Michelangelo wasn't the only one to do so. Angels were depicted without wings in certain contexts. For example, when they functioned as candelabrum bearers or heavenly musicians. In addition, wingless angels were only ever justified in artwork when they were shown interacting with humans as messengers of God. This is seen in Raphael's painting of the Expulsion of Heliodorus, in which we see two young men in pursuit of Heliodorus and are depicted as wingless angels. There are various other examples, but aside from these exceptions, as previously stated, seeing wingless angels in 15th and 16th century art was rare, and Michelangelo was quite aware of the standard norm. But one could make the argument that Michelangelo's decision to portray wingless angels was unconventional and original for two reasons. The first, being as all previous wingless angels were illustrated standing or sitting on the ground, Michelangelo's wingless angels were in constant physical flight. Secondly, while there were a few other Renaissance artists that portrayed wingless angels, Michelangelo was the only artist to consistently depict wingless angels, with a single yet critically important exception, which we'll get to shortly. But of all Michelangelo's works of art, none were as highly criticized as the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. Even after nearly 2 decades after its completion, the theologian Giovanni Andrea Giglio pointed out several serious flaws in the fresco, that which included the evident wingless angels. In Giglio's Dialogue on the Errors of Painters, his claim is that there only exist 3 forms of painting: the vero, or the truth, the finto, or the fictitious, and the fabuloso, or the fabulous. Giglio considered wingless angels to fall under the fabuloso category, as he believed they had no place in religious art. By no means did Giglio believe that Michelangelo objected the church's stance on the true form of angels, but rather that the artist was intentionally choosing to break away from the traditional religious imagery of the time. There have been several past attempts to answer the question of why Michelangelo rendered wingless angels. One attempt hypothesizes that because Michelangelo understood the biblical tradition, which clearly demonstrated that angels were often disguised as human beings, therefore they were rendered wingless, he felt swayed to also depict his angels wingless. While Michelangelo may have thought that his use of wingless angels was theologically sound, angels flying without wings can't be sufficiently explained by the iconographic traditions prior or during his time. Thus, we're left to confidently think that his wingless angels were an original event by the artist himself. Another theory for Michelangelo's wingless angels was put forth by Edgard Wind, who theorized that Michelangelo actually found the inclusion of wings on angels to be aesthetically displeasing, believing that it only took away from the human body's already perfect form. According to Arkin, the issue with this rationale is its inaccuracy. In fact, outside of his religious work, specifically in mythology, Michelangelo thought of the winged male figure to be visually attractive. It was only in his religious work that Michelangelo decided to not feature wings on angels. There are other proposed theories that sound plausible on the surface, but they continually fall short under closer examination. Nevertheless, Arkin makes the claim that we can, in fact, find a valid explanation for Michelangelo's decision to render wingless angels. Of course, one can make the case that not all of Michelangelo's work was devoid of winged angels. A prime example being in 1494, when Michelangelo was hired to complete a project at the shrine of Saint Dominic in the church of San Domenico, Bologna. A young Michelangelo, at the age of 19, was asked to finish the project by creating a similar candelabrum-bearing angel next to the one already created by Niccolo. The issue here was that Niccolo's angel was winged, and that ultimately meant that Michelangelo would have no choice but to recreate a winged angel to match that of Niccolo's. In Michelangelo's defense, this winged angel was not a product of his own choosing, but rather a form that was imposed onto him. It wasn't until his later years, once he reached fame, that Michelangelo was able to freely express himself in his work. Interestingly enough, on closer examination, we see an important detail that Michelangelo left for us in his Saint Dominic angel, that the wings only appear on the angel's left side, which also happens to be the side most visible to the viewer. Because the angel's rear side or right side occupies the blind spot, Michelangelo intentionally left out the wings. So for the viewer, one must walk around the statue towards the back to witness this missing wing. And the smoothness of the marble surface on the statue all but confirms that it is indeed a finished work, which would avoid any attempt to claim that it was an unfinished work by the artist. But this begs the question, was the angel a result of Michelangelo's reluctance to display winged angels? According to Arkin, if this analysis of the Saint Dominic angel is legitimate, we can infer that Michelangelo's displeasure towards winged angels started at the age of 19. His resistance towards winged angels continues on in an unfinished work, Manchester Madonna. Here we see 4 angels surrounding the Virgin Mary. 3 of the 4 angels are rendered without wings, and the 4th, on the right side, is positioned in a way that the frame only allows a few feathers to be seen by the viewer. With these 2 examples, it could be said that Michelangelo acknowledged the religious tradition of the winged angel, but that he also carried an unwillingness to showcase wings. Michelangelo's most influential works of art were completely devoid of wings, and his first prominent work to exclude wings entirely is his fresco on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. When taking a closer look at the fresco, more specifically at the scene of Adam and Eve's expulsion from paradise, it's hard to miss the wingless angel hoisting a sword. Moving on to the creation of Adam, we then see God surrounded by wingless angels. Regardless of where you look throughout the fresco ceiling, you won't find a single winged angel realized by Michelangelo, going against all authority related to Renaissance art at the time. And this isn't his only work to showcase wingless angels. There are plenty of preliminary drawings and letters that bring to light Michelangelo's mental image of the angel. So, why then is Michelangelo opposed to drawing winged angels? Arkin believes that the answer to this question lies in a brief period of time, in the early 1530s, when Michelangelo fell in love with a man by the name of Tommaso Cavalieri. Throughout this infatuation phase, wings and winged angels dominated his drawings and poems. These works of art by Michelangelo serve as biographical documents for determining the artistic and psychological meaning behind his angels and wings. In one particular sonnet written by Michelangelo to Tommaso, the artist declares his yearning to become one with Tommaso. Quote, "If one soul in two bodies is made eternal, raising both to heaven with similar wings, if love with one blow and one gilded dart can burn and rend the vitals in two breasts, and I fly, though lacking feathers, with your wing, with your mind I am constantly impelled toward heaven." End quote. Tommaso is depicted as an angel with wings, whom would bring the poet Michelangelo to heaven. The entire sonnet reveals that Michelangelo thought of Tommaso as an angel to be worshipped as God. Arkin explains that Michelangelo's love for Tommaso is one of divine love, an eternal, perfect love, which was a result of the artist's deep fascination and reverence for Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism was concerned with uniting Christianity with pagan philosophy and associating beauty with Christian values. To the Neoplatonist, the nude male figure was a bodily representation of eternal beauty. Michelangelo's sonnets weren't his only works to include wing imagery. His drawings to Tommaso also incorporated winged creatures. The drawings centered around a main central theme of Neoplatonism, the harmony between sensuality and spirituality. One of the drawings to incorporate this dynamic is that of the rape of Ganymede. The drawing is a symbolic representation of Michelangelo's true feelings for Tommaso. If we look closely, we see a nude male figure fully clasped by an eagle from behind. This visual combination leaves us with an image of a winged nude. It's been argued that this work by Michelangelo was influenced by the dual meaning of the Ganymede myth, which portrays a spiritual salvation or ascent and avert homosexuality. In other words, Michelangelo's love for Tommaso is best represented as two-sided, with an authentic sacred love on one hand and a physical passion on the other, best demonstrated in the posture of the eagle and its forceful grip on Ganymede. So what can be concluded from these works of art created by Michelangelo to his lover Tommaso? Arkin explains that not only did Michelangelo perceive angels as winged creatures, but that he also deliberately left out wings in his religious art because he believed them to be improper. For the artist, his fascination with wings and winged creatures manifested in the form of the winged angel, which signified his erotic state of mind. Michelangelo believed his version of the Christian winged angel to be one and the same as the pagan Cupid or Eros, both which symbolized the homoerotic object of desire. According to Arkin, Michelangelo's winged imagery was his approach to conceptualizing his love for young men, through the image of his union with winged nudes, which symbolized both his sexual and spiritual yearning for love. This artistic expression allowed Michelangelo to give his homoerotic feelings a voice in a way that was in line with his Christian beliefs, while at the same time denying those beliefs. Because Michelangelo associated winged nudes with sinful, homoerotic meaning, it would make sense that he would avoid recreating winged angels in his religious art. For the artist, wings carried with it a dual, conflicted meaning. It's been argued that Michelangelo's use of winged imagery is not an original concept, but as Arkin points out, what makes it an original idea by the artist is the fact that his use of wings overshadows what was commonly understood about winged imagery and what it symbolized during his time. The Neoplatonic literature reveals that at the end of the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th century, winged imagery represented the rising of the soul toward God. Compare this with Michelangelo's belief that wings were a symbol of the union between two men, and we can see why his use of winged imagery was one of a kind. But what would lead Michelangelo to associate nude winged angels with his homoerotic feelings? And why would he feel that it would tarnish his religious work to incorporate winged angels? In 1594, Gabriella Penalty claimed that for Michelangelo, preserving the Christian faith within the artistic spirit was of the utmost importance. In this statement, Michelangelo goes on to state that Fra Angelico was the perfect religious artist, because he painted with, quote, outward expression to his inner devotion and piety, end quote. This was an artist that Michelangelo believed he would never compare to, both personally and artistically, in the purest religious sense. For Michelangelo, an artist's work had to be a reflection of the artist's soul, and for him, his own work was tainted with immoral conviction. So back to the question presented before. Why, in Michelangelo's mind, were wings connected to his homoerotic feelings? Arkin points us in a direction of Plato's Phaedrus. Throughout the text, we see multiple accounts of wing metaphors, which offer three approaches to love that would very well illustrate Michelangelo's art and poetry during his Tommaso Cavalieri fascination. First, the attraction to the physical beauty of young men. Second, the reverence for the admired as a god. Lastly, the connected culmination of both lover and beloved. This is evident in the following lines. But he who is newly initiated, when he sees a godlike face or form, which is a good image of beauty, shudders at first, and something of the old awe comes over him. Then, as he gazes, he reveres the beautiful one as God, and he did not fear to be thought stark mad. He would offer sacrifice to his beloved as to an idol or a god. There are many other examples throughout the text that illustrate quite well the sort of love Michelangelo felt for Tommaso, which you can read for yourself. But as Arkin explains, not only does the Phaedrus show how powerful winged love can be, but that it can also include homosexual union. For Michelangelo, this text granted him the approval and sympathy for his conflicted attraction to young men. A period in young Michelangelo's life that was a source of great influence throughout his entire existence was his involvement and loyalty to the Neoplatonists in Florence. This was a group of scholars and poets who established and maintained male friendships with one another that would best be described as passionate and warm. Surrounding himself with such relationships and people had an influence on young Michelangelo, allowing him to also partake and make sense of his own attraction to men, all within a philosophical framework that was suitable with Christian morals. Unfortunately, for Michelangelo and his fellow peers, this period would come to an end with the rise and reign of Savonarola, a fierce religious fanatic who opposed the Ficenian integration of Christianity and paganism, and especially the act of copulation. In 1494, Savonarola went so far as to publicly declare in one of his sermons that, quote, the love of beardless youth, end quote, was but a sin punishable by eternal damnation. His reign would require the removal of any improper subject matter or style in religious art, which meant only purely religious work would be deemed acceptable. But for Michelangelo, while he respected and looked up to Savonarola and his philosophy, discarding with Neoplatonism was unacceptable. According to the author Panofsky, Neoplatonism wasn't just any philosophical system to Michelangelo. It was a, quote, metaphysical justification of his own self, end quote. It was a system that legitimized the artist's homoerotic feelings and thoughts. As a result, in an attempt to integrate his homosexuality with the criticisms of Savonarola, Michelangelo would begin the process of de-eroticizing the nude image and absolve his soul from sin. This process meant he would have to do away with the winged angel, a symbol that profoundly represented his most homoerotic desires. Consequently, Michelangelo would also have to dispense with the Ficinian goal of bringing together amor and religio, or passionate carnal love with divine eternal love. Arkin goes on to claim that for Michelangelo, the wingless angel could be seen as both a representation of an abstinent or near abstinent life of the artist and the relinquishing of sexuality. For a brief period in young Michelangelo's life, we see the yearning of an artist wanting to love another man, and this desire recreated in the form of winged male youth and other winged creatures. Ultimately, this declaration would come to an end. In the midst of working on the Last Judgment, Michelangelo's art and poetry would experience a change with a shift in the artist's mood. It was then that Michelangelo would abandon his love for Tommaso and redirect his mental energy on his own salvation. Overwhelmed by the thought and fear of damnation and sin, his energy would go to cleansing his soul. If we were to take all this as fact, that Michelangelo's art was the result of internal conflict regarding his homosexuality and the cultural and religious context of his time, according to Penofsky and Arkin, we could reason that Michelangelo's wingless angels symbolize the end of the Florentine Medician Platonic movement and the move towards a purer Christianity, as demonstrated profoundly by Savonarola and the Counter-Reformation. Lastly, according to Arkin, understanding this conflicting phase in Michelangelo's life could help us in solving a riddle the artist left in the Last Judgment: the wing connected to Charon's boat. Note that it's the only wing to appear in this fresco. According to Arkin, one could hypothesize that for Michelangelo, this would be the final renunciation of his homosexuality, with the only suitable place for homoerotic love being hell. Now I want to hear your thoughts. What do you make of all this? How do you view Michelangelo now on a personal and artistic standpoint? I know for me, it's made me appreciate, respect, and revere him and his work that much more. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop us a comment down below, and thanks for watching.